Europe. Coming off of that paper, FEMA and NASA contracted with Dr. Eastland to prepare a paper utilizing space-based technologies, satellite-based technologies for weather modification applications. And one of the things that he saw and that he mentions in both these papers is, for instance, being able to affect tornadoes. And the idea of tornadoes, you know, you have a warm front coming into contact with a cold front, and when they come together, you get a shearing force that causes that twisting action where you get the tornado formation. So the idea of Eastland was if you could heat the cold front sufficiently that when these two fronts connected, you didn't get that energy differential to create that tornado formation, you could essentially knock out tornadoes. The problem is, of course, if you miss and you heat the already heated area so that there's even a greater differential when it encounters the cold front, you have more energy available to create even a more destructive tornado. The fact of the matter is, other governments around the world have taken this very seriously, including our own, and has invested a significant amount of money to look at how to, in fact, affect these things. Remember a few years ago, back during the Clinton administration, actually, there was a tornado that whipped through Oklahoma City, and Clinton showed up, and there was a press report that talked about him saying, don't worry, eventually we're going to figure out how to knock out the energy of those tornadoes, and these won't ever hurt civilized cities again. Well, you know, that was the same city where Ben Eastland at the University of Oklahoma did his computer modeling to figure out how to knock out the energy in those tornadoes a few months before. So what Clinton was actually saying was based on the scientific evidence that had been produced in that very same city just months before. The idea of weather modification continues to be of major interest, again, as we advance this revolution in military affairs, which is this concept of warfare emerging here in the beginning of the 21st century and at the end of the last century. Now, that concept essentially came from a paper written in 1989 by the U.S. Army War College, and it was a paper that was called The Revolution in Military Affairs. And what it said is that the technology was changing so dramatically. They equated it with the change that happened when gunpowder was introduced to Europe in the Middle Ages, or when atomic weapons were introduced in the middle of the last century. That's the kind of revolution taking place today, using energy as the base of the science. Not bullets and bombs, but speed of light technologies, from high-powered lasers to particle beams to HAARP systems. These are the systems of the 21st century, and here's what we have to consider. When you're using energy discharges, like for instance in an anti-ballistic missile arrangement where you've got incoming missiles, you know, here in Alaska, we've become the place where they've built the new missile defense system. So they've installed in underground silos interceptors. You know, literally bullets to hit other bullets, flying at us at about 30,000 miles an hour in re-entry speeds. They're going to try and pick those off, and in most of the tests so far conducted, they failed. The reality is they won't use conventional warheads to knock out these craft. They're going to use space-based laser systems that are being developed, other energy-based systems. And the reason we know this is because you have the ability to, number one, target with precision. These weapons, when they fire a laser or a particle beam, they travel at the speed of light, 186,300 miles per second. That can literally go around the planet 7 times with time left over in less than a second. So being able to target, say, an intercontinental ballistic missile, you'd literally be able to knock it out of the sky before it ever left the launch pad with this type of technology. That's where missile defense is going in the 21st century. The interceptors are the party line for the public. The reality is these other systems are advancing. The Department of Energy has owned patents since the late 1980s that are cited in the book Earthrising the Revolution, which I wrote with James Roderick a number of years ago. The fact is they've had the technology, they're advancing the technology. HAARP is a part of this advancement, this revolution in military affairs. The other thing that's happening and where the HAARP issue starts to cross over is the idea of affecting our physical bodies, affecting our health or our mental states. That is an area of technology that has raised huge, huge controversies around the world today, and is continuing to be raised today because of the implications in 24th century warfare. Now, take the concept of speed of light weapons and overlay that concept on this idea that George W. Bush has introduced as President of the United States, called preemptive warfare. This is the concept of figuring out who your enemies are before they know they're your enemies and wiping them out. You know, it works good when you're the top dog, when you own all the technologies that make preemptive warfare effective. But in the advent of speed-of-light weapons, weapons that discharge instantly where there is no time to react, is preemptive warfare a concept we want to introduce to the world scene today? China, the largest industrial power emerging on the planet, 13% growth per year consistently, 11 to 13% growth per year, building the largest industrial base, dwarfing the Industrial Revolution of the West of the last century. They're going to be capable of developing these very same technologies. They say, don't worry about the Chinese. They only spend $40 to $44 billion a year on defense, a fraction of what we spend in the United States. In fact, 10% approximately of what we spend in the United States. But if you look at what you buy in China for $44 billion, it's significantly more than we get for all the money we spend on defense within this country. That is the major, major issue. Taking from the brains of a billion citizens in a centralized government like China's and isolating those technologists, those future scientists, those engineers that can develop this type of technology is in fact a major area of Chinese advancement according to things being released by our Central Intelligence Agency today. Articles that have appeared in Russian military journals and other journals indicate that they are moving along the same path that we are with as much speed as we are. The problem is, again, the ideologies behind the technologies, whether it's the Chinese government, the Chinese military, or whether it's the United States government. Whatever the value systems that drive our technology, they should come from the people and spring forward. That's the nature of democratic republics. That's the nature of democracies. That's what's missing in the evolution of military technologies around the world today, including the United States. One of the other applications of the HAARP technology is the idea of energy transfer from one place on the planet to another. And this is really one of the more interesting ones. It's one of the first tests, in fact, the first test of a small array was to see if you could focus the radio frequency energy in a way where you could take electrical energy, convert it to radio frequency energy, then send it back up into, say, a satellite or a low-orbiting space platform, and turn that radio frequency energy back into electrical energy where it can be utilized as a power source. Now, why this is important as a power source, if you think about it, low-orbiting space platforms, if you could put these low-orbiting space platforms around the planet to utilize energy-based technologies like space-based lasers, you could get closer to your targets, but you have to have a fuel source. You can't just keep sending shuttles up there with energy. You have to be able to get the energy to those low-orbiting space platforms. And what they figured they could do with HAARP and systems like HAARP is keep energized space platforms for up to 10,000-hour missions. So literally, indefinitely, keeping objects afloat by continually feeding them the necessary energy they need to recharge and maintain their power levels. The other place where they looked at low-orbiting space platforms is using the ionosphere itself, literally tapping the energy as these space platforms whip through the ionosphere using tethers, long conductors dragging from below, actually picking up power along the way. And you remember the shuttle experiment a number of years ago where they did this with a tether hanging from the shuttle, and such a huge amount of power built up that it almost blew the shuttle out of the sky. The reality is these are all ways of looking at energy-based warfare systems, something that we haven't had in the past. In the 1980s, during the first of Star Wars, these were discounted because you couldn't stabilize satellites to, for instance, fire a laser. And if you get just a little bit of wobble from a distance, you know, the further you go, the further out that wobble becomes. If you're a carpenter, you know that we start on one side of a house and you're a 1/16 of an inch out. By the time you're on the other side of the house, you're an inch out. Well, imagine from space being a 1/16 of an inch out where you would be. You'd be miles off your target. So space platforms stabilizing became an issue for the 90s, which they actually figured out how to do it, making that type of technology applicable in this century. When you look at the combinations, it's pretty remarkable. One of the other places they looked at an experiment, you remember the shuttle experiment where they unraveled a big mylar reflector, and this was supposed to be going to collect solar energy and reflect it so they could use this energy? Well, it just so happens within the patent, solar reflectors were also needed in the case of HAARP. because of the, again, sending energy up, being able to concentrate it to a relatively small area and then bounce that energy through these reflectors to other parts of the planet where that energy could then be converted back to electrical energy. Now, why would that be important? Anytime you have a war, you need power sources. If you could literally do it wirelessly and get your energy without moving diesel fuel and all of the stuff that you have to move logistically, that becomes pretty advantageous. So wireless transfer of energy became one of these very concepts. Interestingly enough, during the Hickel administration, when he was governor of Alaska, Glenn Olds, one of his, I believe he was a commissioner of commerce at the time, actually had this concept of wireless transfer of energy for remote places in Alaska. So these concepts aren't new, they're just being revisited in light of new technology. HAARP happens to present a bit of that technology as well. Over the years, HAARP has created, quite a lot of controversy. In fact, when you look on, if you do a search under HAARP, H-A-A-R-P on the internet, you'll find thousands and thousands of sources and documents and materials. Some of it pretty outrageous, quite frankly, and some of it right on target. Like any issue, HAARP is no exception. It draws a lot of controversy, draws a lot of misinformation to the debate as well. This video was prepared to give a summation of the technology, but I recommend highly that people take a look. Get the book from your local library. Angels Don't Play This HAARP. There's over 350 sources cited in that book that validate all of the things that we've covered today. Take a look. When you're looking at these kinds of issues, big issues that can literally change the face of the planet, look deeper. Make sure that the facts are there. Make sure the information is there. But then get that information to those that can make a difference, whether it's your local political leadership coming out of your own states and your own countries. The fact of the matter is these technologies have to be engaged in the true light of day. We can't allow militaries to advance technologies that have these kinds of implications for the planet, for our health, for our environment. If we're really to be stewards of this planet, it requires real action. Each of us can do something within our spheres of influence to make a difference, whether it's this issue or any of the other issues we cover in this series. The fact of the matter is, people make the difference. People make things change. And we need to engage the processes and do exactly that. And let's let our technology serve us in the 21st century as man intends it to do, and not create just another situation that we have to clean up in the next century. Thanks for spending the time with me today. Check out one of our other videos. We've got the mind control video, Technologies in the 21st Century, and a new video being produced on Earth changes. Thanks for being with me.